Okay, so I know you're going to be teaching Nakshatra course, which is really exciting. So I thought if I could ask some of my Nakshatra questions today, and if we can go over that.
Yeah, that'll
Yeah,
be awesome.
it is
Because,
awesome.
yeah, let me just say a thing or two about that class.
Yes.
I think I'm going to start it in 1 or 2 weeks. So I'll make a public announcement about it soon. It's going to be a class specifically on all this material that's being brought to light finally from Taittiriya Brahmana, that is a real Vedic source of information on the nakshatras that's been completely overlooked in the Vedic astrology community forever. Although it got a sort of a translation many, many years ago from David Frawley, it wasn't really a very clear translation in that it mixed a lot of interpretation and other ideas and commentaries into the translation. I really worked on this sutra, these nakshatra sutras that are in the Taittiriya Brahmana. I really worked on them to really clearly explain what each nakshatra is, what the
Yeah.
weakness of each nakshatra is,
Okay.
and what the strength of each one is, what each nakshatra wants to do, and what it needs to have in order to do it.
Okay.
So it would be, and it would be in an intensive format. So it would be like 3 nakshatras per class. So we would do like a 10 session thing. So I'm totally gung-ho to get that nakshatra class started. So I'm probably going to be gung-ho to hear what kind of nakshatra questions you have.
I have a few.
All right.
Hopefully they're relevant and good. Okay, so when we're talking about nakshatras, we're looking at a pretty profound diametrical dynamic because nakshatras are supposed to be based on fixed stars, right?
Yeah.
And they have a fixed nature, and yet they have a direct relationship to the moon, which is always fluctuating. So it has that fluctuating nature. So I wanted to know if you could explain what exactly are the nakshatras supposed to represent in our realm of experience and human experience in this dynamic of constant flux with the moon.
So let me see if I understand what you just said.
Yes.
You said that the nakshatras are fixed.
Based on the fixed stars, right?
Right? Yeah. And was there another point that you made?
Yeah, and the moon is constantly in flux. And they seem to be, we're looking at the nakshatras based on the movement of the moon, right? They're related. So I wanted to know, like, how do we juxtapose these two things or bring them into relationship when we're actually talking about our human experience? What does that mean to us?
Okay. So I think, if you don't mind, I'm going to do my Kritika surgery on your question.
Please. Yes.
Yeah, I have this Kritika. My first lord is in Kritika in the 5th house, and it's Saturn. So I tend to do this Kritika surgery on people all the time.
I have Kritika, so I can appreciate it.
Awesome.
Yes.
Where's yours? What's going on with your Kritika?
It's in the 4th house with Mercury and Venus.
Good. So maybe the Mercury there lets you relate with my 5th house Kritika.
Yes.
So yeah, you produce an interesting phenomena. You described an interesting phenomena that these nakshatras are fixed, but they're based on the moon, which is very fluctuating. So that seems to be something special. But what I would dissect that and say, well, how special is that? I mean, the signs are also fixed. There's 30-degree fixed segments of space that are fixed to the equinoxes and solstices.
Right.
And all the planets also fluctuate and move through them. So, I mean, that's basically the nature of what's going on. That's the difference between a sign and a planet, or a nakshatra and a planet. It's the difference between the planet is like a person who moves, and the sign is like a place in which the person moves. So that's the fundamental difference between the divisions of space, which are nakshatras and signs, versus the planets. They don't divide space, but they move through space. So I don't think there's anything too phenomenal about the fact that the nakshatras are, fixed segments of space, but the moon is fluctuating. So if you subtracted that from your question, what would still be left in the question?
Well, I guess if I extracted the moon out of that question, it would be how would the nakshatras affect our realm of experience, which I have a series of questions about the nature of the nakshatras and how we would translate that in a chart or
Yeah.
analyze it.
Okay, so again, I'll do kritika.
Yes.
It's not really like these are going to affect. But now, when you're an astrologer and you look at a chart, you can conceive of it. You can read the thing as if the symbols inside the chart are affecting things. That can just help you think.
Okay.
It can be useful to how you think. But actually, they're not affecting anything. Do the numbers on a clock affect time?
No.
Right, they don't. Does the speed of the hands at which the hands move affect time? No.
No.
Actually, if the battery totally dies out on a clock, does it affect time? No. But the clock is useful for understanding what time it is.
Right.
So the same way, this sky is a gigantic clock.
Mm-hmm.
That's all it is. It's a big, gigantic clock. And then we have these divisions of the clock by nakshatras or by signs. We divide, this is the first space, the second space, up to 12 spaces. Or if we use nakshatras, we get 27 or 28. And then we have the clock, the hands of the clock, we got 9 of them, or 8. Rahu, Ketu are one big one.
Right.
Yeah. So it's not like the clock is affecting time, but the clock is allowing us to tell time. So the nakshatras, they don't affect, but what do they tell us about? Right. So now if we subtract the word affect from your question, we'll get, this is what I mean by kritika, it cuts things and pulls things out. Then your question becomes, well, what do the nakshatras signify in the human experience, right?
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
They're the, well, it's the same basic thing that the signs signify, but it's just a different way of dividing space. The signs signify how the planet will be able to operate.
Okay.
The planet's always the main focal point for an interpretation. The planet goes someplace, and then by virtue of being in that place is able to do something.
Right.
Like, let's say you're interested in anthropology.
Yes.
So if you go to the library, there's a lot of stuff you can do there. Or if you go to like a archaeological dig, there's a lot of stuff you can do there. You'd be excited, you'd be interested.
Yes.
But if somebody who's interested in bowling goes to the library, they get frustrated there. There's nothing that they feel there. They go out to the middle of a desert and they just feel like they're in the middle of a hole and people are boring and digging for little scraps of junk. So because you have a different agenda than the person with bowling, then the way you react to different places is different than the way the person is. So similarly, a planet like Jupiter, when you put it in a sign where there's a lot of reflectivity and depth of thought like Cancer, it feels very excited. It's able to do what it wants to do.
Right.
Just like you would be in a library. But if you put a planet like Mars, which is full of energy and wants to do things and accomplish things, and you put it in a very reflective, thoughtful sign like Cancer, it gets impatient, it gets frustrated, and it gets debilitated there. So that's what signs signify. They don't so much signs or nakshatras. These are the divisions of space. Place is passive. Okay. Planets are active. People are active. The place is passive, but the people have to use the place to the resources, the environment. The environment is passive. The people are active, but the people get affected by the environment because they have to use the environment to accomplish whatever goals they have in mind. So that's how planets are affected by nakshatras. That's how planets are affected by signs, the same way that our environment affects us.
I see. Okay.
So it's not really that signs signify anything specifically, but they provide resources for planets to be able to do things.
Okay.
Sometimes those resources that they provide go really well with what the planet wants to do. Then the planet gets a good dignity there and can function well. Sometimes the resources are opposite to what the planet wants to do and the planet gets really frustrated. Same thing with nakshatras. They provide resources. They give you access to, and this is what the Taittiriya Nakshatra Sutras talk about. What is this nakshatra really good for doing?
Okay.
So if you put a planet in that nakshatra that likes to do that type of thing, then it becomes very productive there.
I see. Okay.
And that's our modern way of doing it. Of course, like Taittiriya Brahmana, it does have one little section where it mentions solstices, equinoxes. So by reference, by extension, it mentions zodiac signs, 12 signs, and it mentions in that very same paragraph 7 planets.
I see.
There's one section in this really old Brahmana, but most of the book is about nakshatras. And it's not talking about planets and nakshatras, it's talking about doing things while the moon is in certain nakshatras.
Okay.
So the older way of interpreting nakshatras is what kind of activity would be good with these type of resources.
I see.
I should do this type of activity while these types of resources are available by virtue of the fact that the moon is in this nakshatra at that time.
Okay. I understand. Okay. Should I go to the next one?
Yeah.
Yes. So the nakshatras are also the lunar mansions, right? So there is a correlation between the moon and these lunar mansions, the nakshatras. I wanted to better understand how they came to be related as moon's wives, and what is the wife symbolically? What is it saying? What is it representing?
Okay, great.
Do we need to read between the lines when they say the 27 wives, or?
What would you read between the lines?
I don't know how the moon literally has 27 wives. I'm just trying to understand symbolically what this means.
Yeah, okay. First, let's let's talk about lunar mansions.
Yes.
That's what the nakshatras are. Now, why is it called a lunar mansion? Because it's not a solar sign. The signs are the 12 signs. The dichotomy of nakshatras and rashis is so interesting. And it's a shame that in India, the sidereal zodiac became so predominant. Because the reason why it's a shame is because it just takes the nakshatras away from what they really are and just makes them as if they were just another section of the signs. Like if they were another, there's Navamsha, there's Dashamsha, and there's also Nakshatras. They're another portion of science, subdivisions of science. But actually what they really are is a whole different way of looking at space.
Okay.
So you look at the same space, but you can look at it from 2 perspectives. One is from the sun's perspective and one is from the moon's perspective. One is like a daytime perspective with the sunlight, and the other is a nighttime perspective from the moon. That's the difference between rashis or signs, which are daylight things,
Okay.
and nakshatra, which is stellar things in relation to the nighttime sky with the moon. That's really awesome. There are 2 separate ways of looking at the same thing. So the way that the signs get to be 12 and why they're 30 degrees each is because they're based on the sun's orbit. And we're going to intersect the sun's orbit by the moon's orbit.
Okay.
So if you just move the sun around the sky over the course of 1 year, but you put a marker on how far the sun gets every time the moon completes one of the same circuits, then you'll get 12 equal 30 degrees segments. And that's what the 12 signs are, divisions of the sun's path. And that's what Rash, in India, they're called Rashi. Rash means light, brilliance, shine, luster. So these are the segments of the sun's shine.
Right. Okay.
And the way that you measure them on Earth, practically speaking, because it's very difficult to see where the sun is. You can't see it against the star. It blots out the stars. So we measure the rashis by the length of the days and the nights, by the ebb and flow of light.
Okay.
So those are rashis, they're signs, right? But then there's these things called lunar mansions. The reason why they're called lunar mansions is because they're places, mansions, houses, areas, which are not based on the sun's orbit, but they're based on the lunar orbit, the moon's orbit. So where the rashis are taking the sun's orbit and dividing it by the moon's, you flip that around to get nakshatras. You take the moon's orbit and you subdivide it by the sun's shorter orbit. The shorter orbit of the sun is sunrise, sunset. The long orbit of the sun is the year.
Okay.
and the moon's orbit is a month. So you take the moon's orbit, it takes a month, and you subdivide it. How many sunrises do you get? You get 27 point something. So that's why China and old India, they said there's 28. This is pretty close to 28. It's like 27 and a half. But the 28th one is a little bit not the same size as the other ones.
Okay.
It's stuck in between two of the other ones. And then later they just said, let's just, simplify. Later on they simplified it, probably as a result. Later on they simplified it. Not too later on. I mean, Taittiriya Brahmana gives you a list of 27 nakshatras. Talks about the 28th one too. But treats the nakshatras as if there's 27 with an extra one stuck in between these two.
I see. Okay.
So that's why they're called lunar mansions, because they're the subdivisions of the space that the moon occupies as it travels around the sky. So it's not the same thing as Rashis. When you make them the exact same thing as Rashis, which is what they do with the sidereal zodiac, then it loses the beauty of the fact that this is the moon's version of space, the nakshatras, which is the other one this is the sun's version of space.
I see. Okay.
So if you go back to your first question and you say, well, what do nakshatras tell us? What are they about? You could milk this a bit to get an answer to that question. You could say, well, they're based on the moon, whereas the Rashis are based on the sun. Okay. You could say the nakshatras, whatever the moon is about. The better you understand the moon symbolism, the better you understand what kind of space the nakshatras are talking about.
Okay.
That's a way to milk it, to possibly get an answer in this regard. Okay. So the moon is more about the person's desires, their internal, their mind, which is the wealth and the repository of all our desires. So what do you want is really what the moon, the nakshatras are about. And that's when you read through Taittiriya Brahmana with the Nakshatra Sutra that I'll do the class on. It's all about what does this nakshatra want? And then what does it need? What does it want and what does it need? Its want is called a avastat and its need is called a puruṣarthas. And every sutra has those two words, puruṣarthas and avastat. But for each sutra, there's a different thing that the nakshatra wants. Each nakshatra wants a different thing, and each nakshatra needs a different thing in order to accomplish that want. Okay. That's the moony nature there. It wants. The sun's nature is what you get. Instead of being given by the king, this is what you get. Moon's nakshatras are like, this is what we want.
Okay. So
on that, you could say that the nakshatras are more apt actually for psychological analysis. But it's also immature to separate psychology from practical life, because your whole practical life is nothing but a manifestation of your mind. Everything that's in our real world, our job, our marriage, when we get promoted and whatnot, is all a result of how we feel and think and act. How we feel and think and want, and that causes us to act in a certain way, which causes the outcomes in our life. So it's also not that cut and dried that the nakshatras are just about your inner self and then the rashis are about your outer self, because the connection between the two is so intimate. So you can get tons of practical information from nakshatras and you can get tons of psychological information from rashis.
I see. Okay.
Then your other question was about the moon. Why is it the husband, right?
Yes. And the nakshatras are the 27 wives.
Right. This might be a little hard to explain without crossing the PC barrier, about like genders and things like that and the nature things. So it's just that the masculine energy is Mars. Mars starts things. Mars is the activator, right? Feminine energy is represented by Venus, which is the receiver, and then develops it and makes it something wonderful. So people might not like that, might not feel comfortable like that, because the feminine nature is passive, masculine nature is aggressive. And so people always say, well, that's stereotypical. It is stereotypical. But don't be scared of being stereotypical as long as you know that you're being stereotypical. And you should know that this is just the stereotypical theory of the thing, but the way that it actually works in real life is that all these things get blended. There is no 100% feminine woman in the world. And there is no 100% masculine male in the world. Every male and female is a blend of this stereotypical male and female energy. So yeah, you got to not be afraid to be stereotypical if you want to work with symbols, because symbols are always exaggerated and stereotypical, right? Epitomized, because you need to interpret these in their connections with things.
Mm.
So since the feminine principle is passive, the places, the signs and the nakshatras will always be represented as feminine. And since the planet is active, the planet will always be represented as masculine.
Okay.
And one more thing to just finish the piece, whether or not that we can accept this in this day and age. It just goes down to pregnancy. Whenever you just want to see if you're on point with the masculine, feminine understanding that you have, just take it down to your physical body, because that's where you can't deny something. It's just there's a difference between the male sexual organ and the female sexual organ. And if you just think about the difference, the shape, which one goes into which other one, then you can see the nature, the difference between the feminine nature and the masculine nature. And just think about how pregnancy happens. The male just like catalysts it, but then the female develops it. And it's her thing. So that's why the very nature of femininity is that it receives a little catalyst. It has to receive an inception from a male. Then it gets going and it can do its own thing. And if in the Nakshatra class, when we study Uttara Phalguni and Purva Phalguni, there's amazing stuff about this there.
Okay.
Masculine and female nature. Because those two nakshatras are masculine and feminine. And together they represent reproduction.
Yes.
So that's why this is another interesting question too. Like sometimes Venus, people might be tripped out. Like, wait, the moon is a feminine planet. Why is it a husband? Right?
Yes.
Or Venus represents femininity. Why is this guy got a mustache? You look like you look at an Indian depiction of Venus and it's a guy with a mustache. What's going on? So it's just that when you talk about planets in relation to signs, they all become masculine. But when you talk about planets in their own nature, then some of those planets are feminine, some are masculine. So this is also a hint that we're not talking about human genders of male and female. Human genders of male and female are blends of these raw masculine and feminine energies. So planets are all masculine when you relate them to nakshatras or when you relate them to signs. But when you relate them to each other or when you just take them in isolation, then Venus is feminine, Moon is feminine, Mars is masculine, Sun is masculine.
But I have a question regarding this. For example, Venus is the feminine sign of it would be Taurus and the masculine would be Libra, right?
Right.
So it has that duality of male and female, but Moon doesn't. It only occupies one sign. So, and it's considered feminine, and yet he or she turns out to be have 27 wives.
Because women, first of all, like a man.
The Western mind not grasping it.
Women, first of all, if you could imagine 100% masculine man, it would be like the last person you would want to marry.
I can see that.
Because this guy is violent, aggressive, uncooperative, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That's the 100% masculine man. You really want a man who's got enough muscle and strength to be a man when necessary, but who's got enough femininity to be able to understand you,
right,
and talk to you, right? Unite with you. So that's why the moon's the most attractive, because he's got tons of feminine nature, but he can operate like a male in relation to the signs. So the nakshatras will be super attracted to the moon.
Okay.
That's my little justification for that.
Okay.
Yeah, that's interesting thing that you said about Venus has a male sign and a female sign. Every planet actually has a female sign and a male sign, except for the sun and moon. But the sun and moon are the only two planets that only have one sign.
Right.
Because they're a team together. The sun and moon are a team together. So the sun takes the masculine side and the moon takes the feminine side.
Okay.
Takes Cancer and sun takes Leo.
Okay. And can I ask you something related to the myth before I move to the components of the nakshatra and their qualities?
Sure.
Prajapati, the 27 nakshatras are his daughters, right? The 27 daughters.
Interesting.
Is it or is it not?
Yeah, it's interesting. Different Puranas will tell you different things. There's a story. There's one way of seeing it. There's all different ways of seeing something. Different stories or different ways of describing something. So someone can say that these are 27 daughters of the Prajapati, which is the forebearer, the progenitor.
Right. Okay. So my question was, if it was, why were all 27 given to Soma? But if it's not, then it's not a question.
Yeah. But this is typical actually, because this is also hard to understand in the modern world because we don't practice polygamy, right? And maybe there's a couple of places in the world that still do, but it would be hard to understand how it really works. But the way it really works is the women have to cooperate together as a unit. Well, women are good at that compared to men.
Yes.
Right? Women are good at being in. That's why it's easier to do polygamy than the other way around. That's why it lasts longer in history. Originally in history, it's just polyamory. In Satya Yuga, it's just polyamory. But then I think it's with Treta Yuga, it just becomes polygamy. Oh, no. Yeah. I think it goes like this. Satya Yuga, there's no marriage at all. Treta Yuga, there's multiple marriage from both sides. So there's some actual contract is required in Treta Yuga. In Dwapara Yuga, it's just the man has multiple wives.
Okay.
Because the men have lost their ability to cooperate. And then in Kali Yuga, it's just people have lost so many of their inherent good qualities that even the women can't cooperate with each other very well. Everybody has to be held very strictly to the rules because their nature will be to exploit the rules. So it's just monogamy becomes predominant.
Okay.
But in the polygamous system, women need to cooperate. So it's actually very handy because sisters grow up together. They learn how to cooperate. So you find a lot of times that a group of sisters will get married to one person.
Okay.
You find that in a lot of Vedic history.
If someone just tunes into this YouTube channel, we're like, what is this conversation? Yes, no, I understand. Okay. So, and I wanted to ask you one last thing about the 28th nakshatra. Can you correct my pronunciation? Abhijit?
Nice pronunciation.
And I wanted to know, are there extensive interpretation for it? Because it seems forgotten or just tucked underneath something. So I wanted to know if there are extensive interpretation for this chart, and if someone has this, do they need to interpret it as part of their chart? They should.
It is tucked in. Literally, Abhijit is tucked in. It's tucked in between the star called Shrona, which is Shravana. We call it Shravana, and Uttarashada. Right in between Uttarashada and Shravana. So it's like overlapping the last portion of Uttarashada.
Yes.
And a tiny bit of the beginning of Shravana. If your whatever ascendant, moon, whatever planet is in that zone, it's actually not really in Shravana or Uttarashada, it's in Abhijit.
Okay.
But Abhijit is like just a supercharged Uttarashada. Uttarashada means the great victory, and Abhijit means the great victory. Abhijit means so victorious, and Uttarashada means so victorious. So, but it's just like Abhijit it's the final portion of Uttarashada. So it's like, here's where the victory is just so powerful.
Okay.
It's associated with Brahma. So they really understand things really well. They know how things are going to go. They know how things work. They can really dominate if necessary. They can really understand and conquer and be superior.
Okay.
Taittiriya Brahmana does not have a sutra for that Abhijit. They just have 27 sutras. But the Nakshatra Sutra is in the 5th section of the 1st division of Taittiriya Brahmana. There are 3 other sections in Taittiriya, 3 or 4 other sections in Taittiriya Brahmana that are explicitly about nakshatras also.
Okay.
And Abhijit is mentioned separately there.
I see. Okay.
So functionally, you can just treat it as a more awesome Uttarashada.
Okay. So it should lean more towards Uttarashada then?
Yeah, because 90% of it is in Uttarashada.
90%. Okay. Got it. Okay.
Another thing to think about also is astronomy. And just think about where the stars really are. Abhijit is Vega. It's the star Vega.
Okay.
Vega is in the Arctic Circle of the sky. It's in the North Pole area. The 23-degree tilt of the Earth makes Vega sometimes be at the very northernmost point. So
And it's the highest one, right?
It's the
Vega
highest one, yeah.
It's the highest one, right?
You can't get further away from the ecliptic than that.
I see. Okay.
So that's another reason why it's just like it's dropped from the list. It's not exactly a nakshatra, but it's a very special star. Taittiriya Brahmana explains why. Because the gods defeated the devas. The gods defeated the asuras.
Right.
Under the influence of that particular star. They were able to get the asuras out of paradise.
Okay.
On that particular star. So that one, even though, it was like at the last portion of Uttarashada, they were able to do that.
Right.
So they say, okay, well, we should mark that. And since the sun, there's 27 and some change of sunrises in a moon's thing. So we can put that extra bit associated with this nakshatra.
I see. Okay. I understand. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Are we good with time? Yes. Okay. So can I go to this next section? So I wanted to see if you could explain some of the components that are related to nakshatras. And there seems to be so many, and then to just incorporate that and to be able to analyze a chart through them, it would be great. For example, the ruling deities associated to each nakshatra, or the symbols and the secret knowledge that is supposed to be attached to them. So how should one break these down and look at them?
Everybody wants secret knowledge, right?
Yes.
The knowledge which is not secret is not attractive to us. We want the secrets. Yeah. Signs are fairly simple. The zodiac signs are fairly simple. But even that, you'll find that people who don't know how simple they are will bring in 100 other things to try to explain what a sign is. But really, the signs are very simple. They're the planetary ruler, the element, and the mode. And that's it. That explains all the symbolism of the sign. Some people want to talk about weather. Some people want to talk about nakshatras as if they have something to do with the things. But really, the only thing you need to fully understand the sign is to understand its ruler, element, and mode. Now, with the nakshatras, seems like it might be a little more complex, but really it's not. But it's because the things like Taittiriya Brahmana haven't been brought out into the open. So there's really no source of information about the nakshatras. So people dug around, scrambled to try to put together ways to figure out nakshatras. So there's so many ideas about how you explain nakshatras.
Okay.
But if you study the Taittiriya Brahmana and the Vedic idea of nakshatras, it's actually pretty simple. Instead of a planet ruling the nakshatra, there's a god.
Okay.
Every nakshatra belongs to a god.
Okay.
As for why there's a particular god in a particular nakshatra, it's because that god has some important commonality with the nature of this actual star. Like the color of the star, the location of the star, the amount of the stars, the shapes of the nakshatras are not just one star. They're a cluster of stars, usually around one or two or more bright ones.
Right.
So they form a shape. That shape is also the symbol of the nakshatra. You know, like Dhanishta is a drum because the stars make the shape of a circle.
Okay.
So the reason why they associate a god with a particular star is because it's something about the visual component of that star evokes the thought of that god, whether it's the color or the north or southness of it, the shape of it, size of it, the numbers of them.
Okay.
So the main thing that you need to know to understand a nakshatra, just like the main thing you need to know to understand a planet is to understand a sign is the planet who rules it. The main thing you need to know about a nakshatra is the god who rules it. Know the god who rules the nakshatra, you know 60 or 70% of what the nakshatra symbolizes.
Okay.
Same thing with the sign.
Sorry. So, for example, if Shravana, the deity, is Vishnu, so one should know about the qualities of Vishnu to understand Shravana.
Right.
Is that correct?
Yeah. If you want to understand Shravana, learn about Vishnu.
Vishnu. Okay. Okay.
If you want to understand Shatabhishak, learn about Varuna.
Okay.
Then you'll be on the right track.
Okay.
Now, you're not going to, just by learning about Varuna, you're not going to know about Satabhishak, but you have the raw material that you need.
Okay.
So the other thing is you also got to think about the name that was given to the star. Just like in the West, not just in the West, but just like with the Rashis, one of them is called Aries, one of them is called Taurus. And that name and the picture evoked by that name, Aries, a ram, Taurus, a bull, that helps you figure out what is this combination of element, planet, and a mode. Same way the name that was given to a nakshatra helps us figure out what is it about this deity
Okay.
that's really being brought to the fore here with this nakshatra.
Okay.
So you'll need to know Sanskrit to be able to figure out the name, right? Or you'll need somebody has to teach you about this name who knows the Sanskrit.
Okay.
So you need to know the name, the god, and then to know the god, you'll need to know the Vedas, right?
Yes.
So there's no way around this. You have to study. Or you find somebody who can teach you about the nakshatras who studied. But there's no way around it that you need this information has to come from studying the Puranas and the Vedas. Otherwise, what do you know about the gods?
Right.
And you need to know the names, so you need to know Sanskrit. So if you just know the god and the name, you'll figure out 60, 70% of what the nakshatra symbolizes.
Okay.
Then the other thing is the nakshatras have been grouped into categories. So there's categories of nakshatras that are good for sweet things that are romantic and cooperative, like Mrigashirsha, Anuradha, Chitra, and the other one that I always forget. Do you remember it?
Revati.
Revati.
Yes.
Yeah. And then there's other ones that are like very good for just like fighting, killing, defeating, overcoming. That's like Jeshta. There's other ones that are really good at getting things done fast, like Ashwini, Pusha. They put 6 groups. If you learn those groups and which nakshatras fall into each one, that's like learning the elements of the signs. It really helps you understand like another 20% of the nakshatra. So by understanding the god and the name and the group of the nakshatra, you get like 80% of what you need to know.
Okay.
Then the rest of what you do is like learn the Taittiriya Brahmana. Now what the Taittiriya Brahmana does is it tells you the god, the name. For example, the Agni Sutra, the Kritika Sutra is Agnehe Kritika, Shukram Parastat, Jyotiravastat. That's the whole sutra.
Okay.
So what it does is it says, there's a nakshatra called Kritika. You gotta know what Kritika means to get some information out of that. Kritika means like active, sharp, cutting. There's a nakshatra called Kritika, belongs to Agni. What's Agni mean? Fire, What is that God Agni? What is he like? You know about the God Agni, then you know, what does it mean? Agni is kritika. Agni is cutting. Fire is cutting. Fire is action. Fire's, what does fire do? Fire is sharp. What does it do? Fire's kritika. Fire's cut. Wants shukra. Prastat. The prastat, the thing it needs is shukra. Energy. Fuel. It needs fuel. Why? To release light. Jyoti prastat. To release understanding, to release comprehension, to release something, to turn the fuel from its potential state into its activated state. That's what kritika is about.
I see. Okay.
So if you study the sutra for each nakshatra, you'll see what the nakshatra needs and what it wants to do.
Okay.
And then you put that in the context with the god and the name. Throw the symbol on top of that. That really help you. Kritika is symbolized by a blade. So the symbol was also given by astrologers to help us understand what the thing is. Then you get like 100% of your nakshatra. If you want to get 108%, then look at the muhurta recommendations. For example, Taittiriya Brahmana has 2 or 3 sections that are on muhurta recommendations. If you want to do this if you want to fix a mistake that you've made, for example, it says, then try to do that in Punarvasu Nakshatra. Because Punarvasu will let you go back to the way it was before.
Okay.
But don't get married in Punarvasu Nakshatra. Unless your first marriage was bad.
I was going to say, did I give you a reason as to, for the time?
Know the reason. You should know the reason, because Punarvasu means, see, if you know the god, the name, and the nature of this nakshatra, then it will be so sensible and logical to you why you would want to fix a problem in Punarvasu. The very name Punarvasu means, again, remake the existence, rebuild the existence, rebuilding. That's what Punarvasu literally means. So if you want to rebuild something that went wrong, do it in Punarvasu. And it's by Aditi who recycles things.
Okay.
The nakshatra, the sutra for Punarvasu is that it recycles things.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. So if you learn muhurtas, the basic muhurtas, like they'll just say, this nakshatra is for these types of things.
Okay.
Then that's like the icing on the cake. Bump you from 100% to 108%.
Okay. Okay. And in terms of each of the nakshatras have an animal connection and a connection with the yoni, the sexuality of that animal to the sign. Is this something you would also incorporate in the interpretations?
First, I will need to see it mentioned somewhere.
Okay.
First, I'll need to see it in the Taittiriya Brahmana, or first I'll need to see it in the Rig Veda or something, the Vedanga Jyotish. Before I'm going to say, like, this is something I really need to pay attention to.
Okay.
Because otherwise there's so many people saying so many things about nakshatras, because there was so little authentic information about it available in English for such a long time. And frankly speaking, even if it's available in Sanskrit, most people don't read Sanskrit anyway, even in India. So there's just like very little authentic information available about nakshatras. So people came up with a lot of attempts to explain them, but I'm not going to dedicate my brain, time, and energy to pursuing all those explanations of the nakshatras when I can just go and study the authentic source texts.
Right.
So if I see in the source text somewhere that says that this animal belongs to this nakshatra, then I'll pay attention to it.
Okay.
But what I've seen in the interesting thing I saw in Taittiriya Brahmana is it does talk about Deva nakshatras and Asura nakshatras.
Okay.
So that's yet another classification that may be useful. And it does talk about the groups of nakshatras.
Okay.
The other one is until I find it, until I have to correct myself by finding it somewhere. What my current understanding of the situation is, people developed a technique for marriage compatibility in India based on nakshatra. And so they assigned a lot of traits, marriage-related, compatibility-related, sexual-related traits to nakshatras.
I see. Okay.
In order to use the nakshatras for compatibility assessments. And that's where you get a lot of things. that are current, that are like, and the type of yoni, the type of sexual organ is characterized like, it's like this type of an animal.
Okay. Okay. Do the sutras talk about the gunas? Like
No, no.
that's what they don't. So one
Not that
should.
I've seen. I mean, I'm just studying
Right.
Taittiriya Brahmana now, and I didn't even know that Taittiriya Brahmana existed up until I went to Sedona,
Right.
and Ernst Mollin showed it to me. So there might be I might find another book next year, like another authentic Vedic text. But until I do that, I'm not going to say, well, everything is possible. You know what I mean?
Yes.
I'm not going to say, well, it might be in the Vedas, so therefore it's as good as if it's in the Vedas. No, it might be in the Vedas, but until I see it in the Vedas, I got to think that it's not in there.
Okay.
So gunas of the nakshatras, as far as I've seen, are part of that system of trying to assess what the compatibility between people.
Okay.
Which, by the way, isn't Vedic. It's
Or,
modern Indian.
it's modern.
Arranged marriages, this is going to blow people's minds too, but Indian people's minds. Arranged marriages, astrological compatibility is not Vedic. It's a later development in Indian culture.
Okay.
Vedic marriages, even when you talk about like 13 or 27 sisters marrying a husband, this is because they wanted to. They told their father and mother, we like this guy. And it's not until after they tell them that then the father and the mother go and make the arrangements.
I see.
And I'm not making this up. Read any Purana.
Okay.
Maybe there's also the thing with Vedic marriages. There's so many different kinds. There's like 11 or maybe 21 different kinds of acceptable marriages. So one of the kinds maybe is an arranged marriage, but the predominant marriage that's described in the Puranas is the girl falls in love with the boy, tells someone, her father, her mother, her friend, and then the friend makes an arrangement to see if the boy is interested. Just like the way it happens in our world today, right?
Yes.
That's basically the way it happens. Sometimes it goes the other way. The boy falls in love with the girl, tries to get his friend to find out if the girl might like him.
Yes.
And that's what Aryaman and Bhaga, Purva Palguni, Uttara Palguni, they're all about that.
Right.
Sending the messenger to the girl, sending the messenger to the boy. And then the arrangement was, astrological compatibility wasn't checked. It was whether or not the girl likes the boy and the boy likes the girl. Later on, astrology became really, really, really important in India for things like marriage and all that. In the old days, astrology was important to determine when you should do what.
Okay. And do the sutras or the texts that you've come across, do they actually associate a certain planet to a certain nakshatra? Because this is one of those things that's everywhere. The Navagrahas, for example, Swati and Rahu are somehow associated.
Yeah,
so I'm just
not, but that's no mystery to us. The Brihat Parashara Shastra is the source of the association of a planet to a nakshatra.
Okay.
But it's not in any of the old Vedic texts. Brihat Parashara Shastra, somebody wants to say, well, it's written by Puruṣarthas 5,000 years ago. It's not written by Puruṣarthas 5,000 years ago. It's called the Brihat Parashara Shastra.
Okay.
The linguistic dating of it is to the 18th century.
Really?
But we know that it's older.
Okay.
Because old texts from like 2nd and 3rd century mention it.
I see. Okay.
But we don't have a copy of it. It wasn't until the 18th century that somebody put together a copy of it. What they assumed was an anthropologist or a scholar of Indian astrology assembled fragments of references and things like that.
I see. Okay.
So this must have been the Puruṣarthas Shastra. That's what we have now. But anyway, even if it's a Vedic text, Puruṣarthas Shastra is saying, hey, when you do dashas, when you want to calculate a dasha schedule, this is how you do it. Correspond this nakshatra to this planet. So if the moon is in this nakshatra when the person is born, then that's the planet that their dasha cycle starts with. And then it's followed by the planet that's associated to the next nakshatra.
Okay.
And it says, hey, if you want to do the Vimshottari dasha system, then Swati is Rahu. But if you want to use a different system, then there's like 12 other different systems, then Swati has nothing to do with Rahu.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
So again, it's just a case where people didn't have a lot of really trustworthy, authentic, intelligible information about nakshatras. So what do? You sink or swim. You try to figure out a way to make sense of things.
Right.
And so they say, well, we know tons about planets. Right? We know lots about planets. So and look, this is cool. This nakshatra is associated to Rahu. Okay, I know about Rahu, and now it's starting to make sense to me. Because sure enough, you can make sense out of anything, especially if you're intelligent. So yeah, okay, I can explain Swati by referring to Rahu. And if you're intelligent, you can do that. But if you're intelligent, you could explain Swati by referring to Jupiter. Yeah.
Okay. And another thing that's often is related to the nakshatras are the four related aims like dharma, artha, kāma, mokṣa. Is this something that we can do in interpreting the nakshatras?
Nope.
Nope. Nope.
It's not in the Vedic. It's not in the Vedic. Like I said before, until I see it in the Vedic text, then my answer is no.
Okay.
In fact, this is the other thing that you can see happened with people trying to understand nakshatras. We know signs. Everybody knows about signs. 12 signs. My mom knows about signs.
Yes.
She knows Taurus and Gemini and what the difference is, basically. She doesn't know anything else about astrology, but they know signs. So everybody knows lots of stuff about signs. We don't know anything about nakshatras. We can't get any information about them except their darn name. Right? You look at Vedanga Jyotish or Rig Veda, it just gives you a list of their names and it says they belong to this deity.
Okay.
You got like 2 words on every nakshatra. So you just throw your hands up in the air and you say, I don't know. And how am I going to find out about this God? I got to study the Vedas. They're all in Sanskrit. So I got and how do I even know what this name means? I don't know Sanskrit. So how much can I mine out of this name? How much information can I mine out of this name? So people just threw their hands up in the air and they said, let's try to figure out these nakshatras in a way that makes sense to us. Signs make sense to us. Let's think about these nakshatras as if they are parts of the signs. Let's think about these nakshatras as if they have a planet that rules them just like the signs do. Let's think about these nakshatras as if they have fire, earth, water, and air, which are artha, kāma, artha, dharma, and mokṣa.
Yes.
But really, kāma, artha, dharma, mokṣa is earth, or fire, earth, air, water, associated from the cardinal directions, east, west, north, and south. Right? So it really has to do with cardinal directions, solstices, equinoxes, because solstice means north and south. Equinox means east and west. So because of solstice and equinoxes, the cardinal signs are associated to cardinal elements. And then those elements, like air is for kāma, earth is for artha, fire is for dharma, water is for mokṣa. So the signs have artha, the nature. You can understand a sign by saying, well, this is an earthy sign. Well, that means that it's oriented towards artha. It likes practical things. It wants to be stable, likes wealth. But it doesn't work with the signs.
Okay.
But people like to do it because they said, well, look, this is also why they split the nakshatras into 4 padas. Because they said, hey, this is the same thing as the navamshas. And now we can finally understand these nakshatras because now they got 4 signs in them, and we know signs. So this nakshatra right here, it's got 4 subdivisions in it, and each one of them is fire, one's water, one's air, one belongs to Mars, one belongs to Venus. Good. Even though we have no knowledge about nakshatras, now we can we may build some system about how to understand the nakshatras.
I don't know if you realize, but this is going to be pretty world-shattering for us students who are learning because, as we research and we're trying to figure things out, the nakshatra system and interpretations always being said over and over that is based on these kinds of things. Right?
Yeah, but you know what? Yeah. I wish it would be earth-shattering.
Yeah.
But it's only going to be earth-shattering to somebody that has the patience to listen to all 56 minutes of this video that we've done so far, and who even cares enough to think, this makes sense. I'm going to do that. I'm going to, so actually what's going on is it's going to take a long time before this becomes earth-shattering. There's going to be like 1 or 2 people who listen to this video and the light goes on in their head. I'm going to think, okay, I need to study Taittiriya Brahmana and I need to learn about the gods. Then I can understand the nakshatras. Then those 2 people will start to be, then it's like that shampoo commercial. They told 2 friends and they told 2 friends and they told 2 friends. Remember that? That's old time.
Yes. Yes.
So that's what's going to happen. It'll take a time before this becomes earth-shattering. But if anybody traces the epicenter of it, then we might get some credit.
Okay. Okay. Do we have time or?
Yeah, maybe we should stop.
So, great. Thank you so much for answering these.
I would like to be more earth-shattering.
You've been doing a good job.
Yeah. But it's too hard. It's very difficult to be earth-shattering because the earth is very big.
That's true.
So like there's a lot of people out there teaching nakshatras in a certain way. So, or teaching about the zodiac in a certain way. For example, that other problem. So even if I dedicate the rest of my life to like screaming at the top of my lungs about it, because there's 150 other people that are just talking at a normal volume, me shouting at the top of my lungs hardly gets heard.
I understand. But it has to start somewhere.
It's got to start somewhere. And they told 2 friends.
And they told 2 friends. Yes. Yes. Great. Thank you so much.
Okay. Thank you. As
See you
always.
next week.
See you next week.
Yes.
Bye-bye.
Bye.